The Windsor Castle spring air carried the scent of blooming roses and fresh-cut grass. It was the kind of afternoon that spoke of tradition, of centuries of royal gatherings in these very gardens. Catherine stood near the tall windows of the private dining room, watching Charlotte through the glass. Her daughter sat at the long table, shoulders slightly hunched, fork moving slowly across her plate. The animated energy Catherine knew so well had dimmed. Something was wrong. She had noticed it building over the past weeks. Small things at first. Charlotte becoming quieter during family dinners. The way her daughter's eyes would dart toward Camilla when she entered a room. A hesitation where there used to be confidence. Catherine's protective instincts, always sharp and always alert, had moved into high gear. The luncheon today had been Catherine's chance to observe more closely. She positioned herself where she could watch without appearing to watch. What she witnessed made something inside her go quiet and still. The kind of stillness that comes just before action. Camilla had arrived wearing one of her signature outfits, poised and controlled. She had greeted Catherine with the obligatory warmth expected between daughter-in-law and stepmother. But her attention to Charlotte was different. It carried an edge. When Charlotte reached for a second scone, Camilla's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Still hungry, Charlotte?" Her tone suggested something beyond a simple question. It suggested excess, indulgence, lack of restraint. Later, when Charlotte had chattered excitedly about a piano piece she was learning, Camilla had leaned forward. "The adults are trying to have a conversation, darling. Children should be seen and not heard, don't you think?" The words were delivered with a smile. That smile made it worse somehow. Catherine's jaw had tightened. She had excused herself shortly after, taking Charlotte's hand and finding a quiet corridor. Her daughter had looked up at her with eyes that seemed too old for her face. "Mummy, am I showing off?" Charlotte had asked quietly. "Am I annoying?" That single question had crystallized everything. This wasn't about Camilla's occasional coldness or the distant formality that sometimes characterized their interactions. This was deliberate, calculated, aimed at undermining a child's sense of self. That evening, after Charlotte was asleep, Catherine had found William in his study. He was reviewing papers, but she could see the exhaustion in his posture. She closed the door behind her. "We need to talk about your stepmother," Catherine said. No preamble. No softening. William looked up immediately. He knew that tone. Catherine detailed what she had observed. Not just today, but the pattern stretching back weeks. The dismissive comments. The way Camilla's remarks seemed designed to make Charlotte doubt herself. The cold authority in her voice when she addressed the child. William listened without interruption, but she could see something shifting in his expression. His hands had clenched into fists on the desk. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "Long enough that Charlotte is asking me if she's annoying. Long enough that she's withdrawn. Long enough that it matters," Catherine replied. William stood and walked to the window. The palace gardens stretched out before them in the fading light. When he turned back to face Catherine, his expression was resolved. "It stops," he said simply. "This ends now." But Catherine knew it wasn't that simple. Nothing about royal family dynamics was ever simple. Years of protocol, tradition, and careful navigation stood between them and direct confrontation. Camilla held the title of Queen Consort. She had earned it through decades of persistence and calculation. A direct accusation would be read as territorial, as jealousy, as a younger woman challenging an older woman's authority. Catherine understood something crucial in that moment. This couldn't be about anger or confrontation. It had to be about boundaries. Clear, unmovable boundaries presented with such calm certainty that there would be no room for debate. Over the following days, Catherine began subtle documentation. She noted dates and times, specific comments and the context in which they occurred. She wasn't gathering evidence for an external audience. She was creating clarity for herself. Sometimes, when protecting someone you love, you need to be certain of your ground. A royal charity event was scheduled for the following week. It was being organized partly through Camilla's patronage. Catherine had originally planned for Charlotte to attend. She was of the age now where her presence at such events would be appropriate. Expected, even. Catherine made a different decision. When the invitation had been confirmed, Catherine had quietly arranged for Charlotte to have a piano lesson at precisely that time. A lesson she had personally scheduled with one of the finest piano instructors in London. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Charlotte would not be available. Charlotte would not be present. When Camilla heard about the scheduling conflict, the reaction had been cold and contained, but Catherine had felt the displeasure radiating from her. Camilla had invested in having Charlotte there. She had plans for the evening that somehow involved having the child present. Catherine had removed that option entirely. It was the first move in a chess game that would be played over weeks. The pattern continued. Catherine became more visibly protective. When Camilla made a comment about Charlotte's appearance at a family gathering, Catherine's response was swift and public. "My daughter looks beautiful. I won't have that questioned." Short, clear, delivered with a smile that made it plain that this was not negotiable. William had begun paying closer attention as well. He would position himself near Charlotte during family events. Not hovering, not obviously protective in a way that might seem unusual, but present. His presence alone seemed to alter Camilla's behavior. She became more careful, less inclined to make the sharper comments when William was within earshot. But Catherine knew that careful observation and casual presence would only work for so long. Real protection required a real confrontation. It required Catherine to sit across from Camilla and articulate, with absolute clarity, what would and would not be tolerated. That confrontation was coming. Catherine could feel it building like a storm on the horizon. For now, she simply watched. She held Charlotte a little closer. She reinforced, in small ways throughout each day, that her daughter was valued, that her thoughts mattered, that she was not showing off by being herself. And when Charlotte smiled again, when that light returned to her eyes, Catherine knew she was doing the right thing. Camilla had made a critical miscalculation. She had assumed that Catherine's role as a younger woman, as a daughter-in-law, came with built-in deference. That tradition and title would protect her from accountability. Camilla had not reckoned with a mother whose child had been hurt. Catherine understood something about power that went far beyond royal hierarchy. She understood that love could be more forceful than any title. That protection could be more absolute than any crown. And she was just getting started. The private dinner at Highgrove House was meant to be intimate. Just family. The kind of gathering where formality could theoretically give way to genuine connection. Catherine knew better. She had learned long ago that royal dinners were never truly private. They were performances with smaller audiences. She had dressed carefully. Not to impress, but to project authority. A deep blue dress, elegant but not ostentatious. Her posture was perfect, her expression composed. These details mattered. Camilla understood the language of appearance, of subtle signals sent through clothing and bearing. Catherine was fluent in that language too. William sat at the head of the table, Catherine to his right. Charlotte and George occupied the children's end of the dining room, supervised by their nanny but still within the line of sight. Charles was present, his expression already carrying the weight of knowing that tension existed in the room. He never liked tension. He preferred the fiction that everything was harmonious. Camilla arrived precisely on time. She always did. Punctuality was one of her weapons, a way of asserting control through adherence to protocol. Her dress was striking, as it always was. But Catherine noticed something else. Camilla's posture was slightly defensive. She knew something was coming. The question was whether she understood what or simply felt the shift in the atmospheric pressure. The meal progressed through its first courses with the kind of conversation that filled time without saying anything. Comments about the weather. Updates on upcoming engagements. Observations about the gardens. All of it surface. All of it a kind of holding pattern. Catherine waited. She had learned the power of silence. Camilla, by contrast, filled silence. It made her uncomfortable. It made her talk. It made her reveal. As the main course was being served, Camilla made her move. It was subtle, the kind of remark that might have passed unnoticed if Catherine hadn't been watching so carefully. "Charlotte looked rather tired today," Camilla said, addressing the table but clearly meaning William. And Catherine. I do wonder if she's being pushed too hard. Piano lessons, writing instruction, tutoring. Children need space to simply be children, don't they? The implication was clear. Catherine was overextending the child. Catherine was the problem. Catherine set down her fork slowly, deliberately. She turned her full attention to Camilla. Not with anger, but with the kind of focus that made clear she was about to say something that mattered. Charlotte is thriving, Catherine said. Her voice was calm, but it carried weight. She's confident, engaged, and happy. She's also had some difficult moments recently. Moments when she's doubted herself. When she's questioned whether she's acceptable as she is. She let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. She could feel Charles shifting uncomfortably. William remained perfectly still. Those moments have coincided with a pattern of critical remarks directed at her. Not by her tutors. Not by her family who loves her. By someone who holds a position of authority and who uses that position in ways that undermine a child's confidence. Camilla's expression had frozen. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. I think what you're doing, intentionally or not, is damaging, Catherine continued. And it's going to stop. There was no aggression in her tone. That was the power of it. She was stating facts, making declarations, not attacking, but simply articulating reality. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Camilla said, but her voice had lost its smooth quality. It was thin now, defensive. I'm suggesting that you are aware of how you speak to Charlotte. You're aware that your remarks carry weight because of who you are. And you seem to have decided that it's appropriate to use that weight to criticize her. For eating. For speaking. For being young and alive and confident. That ends now. Catherine leaned back slightly in her chair. She picked up her water glass and drank. The gesture was casual, but it signaled something crucial. She was done. The statement had been made. There was nothing more to debate. Charlotte deserves kindness. She deserves respect. And frankly, she deserves better than to be made to feel small by someone in her own family. If you cannot offer her those things, then your presence in her life will become limited. William and I will ensure that. William spoke for the first time. Catherine is right. His voice carried the weight of his position. His authority. Charlotte is our daughter. Her well-being is our priority. That's non-negotiable. Charles opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Camilla, then away. He was choosing silence. Catherine understood what that silence meant. It was the silence of a man who knew his wife had been wrong and who didn't have the strength to defend her or himself in that moment. Camilla's hands had tightened on her napkin. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said. I'm fond of Charlotte. I've never intended anything but kindness. Intention doesn't matter, Catherine said quietly. Impact does. And the impact of your behavior has been to make a child doubt herself. That's the reality we're addressing. Whether that was intentional or not is less important than ensuring it stops. The rest of the meal continued in near silence. The food was excellent, as always, but no one was really tasting it. Conversation, when it occurred, was stilted and sparse. Charles attempted some comments about an upcoming state visit, but even he seemed to recognize the futility of his efforts. By the time dessert was cleared away, the tension in the room had become almost tangible. Catherine remained composed throughout. She had said what needed to be said. She had done what needed to be done. The rest would be determined by Camilla's response. After dinner, as they gathered in the drawing room, Catherine watched Camilla carefully. Her stepmother was moving through the motions of normalcy, but something had shifted in her. She was moving more slowly, speaking less. Her usual sharp wit had been replaced by careful, measured responses. More importantly, Catherine noticed that Camilla was no longer looking at Charlotte. When the child entered the room, Camilla's gaze deliberately moved away. It was the gaze aversion of someone who had been corrected and was now uncertain of her footing. Catherine excused herself early, citing tiredness. William followed shortly after, taking Charlotte's hand as they made their way back to their private quarters. Once Charlotte was settled with her nanny, William pulled Catherine into their bedroom and closed the door. That took courage, he said quietly. It took clarity, Catherine replied. She needed to understand that there are boundaries. Real ones. Not theoretical ones. "Do you think it will work?" William asked. Catherine considered the question seriously. "I think she understands now that there are consequences. That will change her behavior. Whether she truly changes her heart, her motivations, her fundamental character, I don't know. And I'm not sure it matters. What matters is that Charlotte will be protected." Over the following week, the impact of that confrontation became apparent. Camilla's behavior shifted noticeably. She was still present at family events, still maintained the appearance of engagement. But her interactions with Charlotte became distant, almost formal. When she did speak to the child, her remarks were carefully neutral, safe, non-critical. It was as though a line had been drawn in invisible ink, and Camilla was now acutely aware of its presence. Catherine did not celebrate this shift. She simply noted it. She observed Camilla's new distance with the kind of careful attention she had previously reserved for monitoring inappropriate behavior. She wanted to ensure that this new dynamic didn't swing to the other extreme. That Camilla's withdrawal didn't itself become a form of rejection that Charlotte would sense and internalize. But Charlotte seemed lighter. The shadow that had been crossing her small face began to lift. She smiled more easily. She played more freely. The confidence that had been shaken began to rebuild. And Catherine remained vigilant. Always present. Always watching. Always ready to intervene if the boundaries she had established began to blur. This was what maternal protection looked like in the context of royal hierarchy. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simply the steady, unwavering commitment to ensuring that her child would not be harmed by anyone, regardless of their title or position. Camilla had learned that lesson. The question now was whether the lesson would hold. The summer at Balmoral arrived with the kind of perfect Scottish weather that seemed almost staged. The castle sat against rolling hills of deep green, and the air carried the fresh, clean scent of moorland and heather. It was the kind of place that felt removed from the rest of the world, a sanctuary where time moved differently and the normal rules seemed to shift. Catherine had brought Charlotte to Balmoral with a specific intention. The castle represented tradition. It represented the continuity of the royal family across generations. It also represented a place where old dynamics could either be reinforced or fundamentally altered. Catherine intended to ensure it was the latter. The first days were measured. The family gathered in its various configurations. Morning walks across the grounds. Afternoon teas. Formal dinners. Camilla was present, as she always was, but something had fundamentally changed in her posture toward Charlotte. The distance she maintained was notable. When she encountered Charlotte in the corridors or the drawing rooms, she would offer a polite greeting and then find a reason to be elsewhere. It was not cruelty. It was calculation. Camilla had recognized the boundary and was now staying carefully on the acceptable side of it. But boundaries, Catherine understood, were not static things. They required maintenance. They required ongoing reinforcement. Otherwise, they eroded. Gradually. Almost imperceptibly. Until one day, someone would test them again, assuming they had faded. On the third day at Balmoral, that test came. Catherine was walking with Charlotte through the gardens when Camilla appeared on the path ahead of them. The encounter seemed almost accidental, but Catherine had learned to recognize Camilla's patterns. There was nothing accidental about her movements. Everything was calculated. Camilla greeted them with her practiced warmth. She bent slightly toward Charlotte, her expression suggesting genuine interest. "Charlotte, you're looking quite flushed from your walk," Camilla observed. Then, with a tone that suggested she was being helpful, she added, "Perhaps you should slow your pace. Exertion isn't becoming at your age. Young ladies should maintain a more measured demeanor." It was subtle. So subtle that anyone observing might have wondered if Camilla had meant anything critical at all. The words themselves could almost pass as concern. But Catherine heard the undertone. The implication that Charlotte's natural exuberance, her joy in physical activity, her simple pleasure in walking through gardens, was somehow inappropriate. Catherine's response was immediate. "Charlotte's pace is exactly right for her," Catherine said, her voice calm but absolutely clear. "Her energy is appropriate for her age. Her joy in movement is healthy and beautiful. and your commentary on her behavior has ended." She took Charlotte's hand and continued walking, not waiting for a response from Camilla. She didn't need one. The message had been delivered. Later that evening, William found Catherine in the library. He had heard about the encounter within hours. The castle staff, as always, knew everything that happened within its walls. "She tested the boundary," Catherine told him before he could ask. "I know," William said. "And you reinforced it." "She'll test it again," Catherine said. "People like Camilla don't understand boundaries. They understand power. She'll keep pushing until she's absolutely certain the boundary is immovable." "And is it?" William asked. Catherine met his eyes directly. "Yes, it is. As immovable as I can make it." Over the following days, the family settled into a rhythm. Camilla's attempts at engaging with Charlotte became fewer and further between. When they did occur, Catherine was there, present, watchful, ready to intervene if necessary. But something interesting began to happen. As Camilla withdrew more deliberately, Charlotte seemed to relax more deeply. The child began to understand, on some intuitive level, that she was protected, that her mother would not allow her to be diminished by anyone, regardless of their position or title. The confidence that had been eroding began to rebuild. Not quickly, but steadily. Charlotte laughed more freely. She spoke more readily. She took up space in conversations without apologizing for her presence. By the second week at Balmoral, the shift was undeniable. The family dynamics, which had been tense and fraught just weeks earlier, had recalibrated into a new configuration. Charles seemed relieved by the change, though he maintained careful neutrality on the subject. He was not a man comfortable with conflict, and the confrontation that had occurred at Highgrove had clearly troubled him. But even he could see that something had shifted toward a more functional equilibrium. William moved with the confidence of a man whose wife had fought for their daughter and won. There was a subtle shift in how he carried himself. His authority seemed more grounded, more certain. He was no longer caught between loyalty to his stepmother and protection of his child. The choice had been made for him by Catherine's actions, and he was relieved to not have to make it himself. Camilla maintained her position as queen consort. She attended all the requisite events. She fulfilled all her duties. But something essential had changed. She had been shown her limits. She understood now that there was a line she could not cross. That the power she wielded through title and position was not absolute. That a mother's protection could supersede even royal hierarchy. It was a lesson Catherine suspected would remain with her for a long time. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner at Balmoral, Catherine observed a moment that crystallized everything. Camilla was seated across from William. Charlotte was at the children's table, but still within clear sight. A servant had just placed a dessert course in front of Charlotte, a particularly lovely French pastry that the castle was known for. Catherine watched as Charlotte looked toward Camilla, a tiny flicker of hesitation crossing her face. For a moment, the old pattern threatened to resurface. Charlotte was checking. She was wondering if eating the pastry would incur criticism, if it would be seen as indulgent or showing off or any of the other accusations Camilla had leveled. But then Catherine caught her daughter's eye and smiled. A simple, clear smile that said, "You are allowed. You are valued. Eat your dessert." Charlotte's face brightened. She turned back to her plate and ate the pastry with visible enjoyment. She didn't look toward Camilla again. Camilla, for her part, was watching this exchange. Catherine saw her see it, and she saw something shift in Camilla's expression. It was not quite acceptance, but it was something like acknowledgment. Acknowledgment that the balance of power had shifted. That Catherine's love for her daughter superseded Camilla's position or authority. The confrontation at Highgrove had been necessary. But this moment, this simple moment of a child eating a pastry without fear, was the real victory. Over the remaining weeks of summer, the family fell into a new rhythm. It was not perfect. Family dynamics never were. But it was safe. Charlotte was safe. And that, for Catherine, was everything. As they prepared to leave Balmoral and return to London, Catherine took a final walk through the castle gardens. The heather was in full bloom, painting the moorland in shades of purple. The air was cool and clean. William found her there, as she knew he would. "Thank you," he said simply. Catherine didn't ask what for. She knew. She had done what needed to be done. She had protected their daughter. She had established boundaries that would endure. She had shown that maternal love could be more powerful than royal protocol. "She'll keep testing," Catherine said. "Camilla isn't the type to simply accept defeat. But the boundary is clear now, and I'll continue to enforce it every single time she approaches it." "I know you will," William said. "That's why Charlotte will be okay." As they walked back toward the castle, Catherine reflected on the past weeks. The observation, the documentation, the careful planning, the confrontation, the ongoing reinforcement. It had been exhausting. It had required constant vigilance and absolute clarity. But looking at her daughter, safe and confident and genuinely happy, Catherine knew every moment had been worth it. This was what protection looked like in the context of royal life. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud or confrontational in any lasting way. It was simply the steady, unwavering commitment to ensuring that someone you love would not be harmed by anyone, regardless of their position or power. Camilla had learned that lesson. She had learned that there were boundaries she could not cross, that there were people she could not diminish. That maternal protection was a force that superseded even royal hierarchy. The palace had not crumbled. The institution had not changed. But the dynamics within it had shifted fundamentally. Charlotte was protected, and Catherine had ensured that everyone who needed to know understood that this protection would be absolute and ongoing. As the summer drew to a close and the family prepared for autumn, Catherine felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. Not the peace of conflict resolved, but the peace of a mother knowing her child was safe. Of boundaries established and maintained. Of love proving stronger than tradition. This was victory. Not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet certainty that her daughter would wake each morning without fear. Without doubt. Without wondering if she was acceptable as she was. And that, Catherine understood, was worth everything.